The scream of a horse in the midnight darkness brought Cole Hastings running from the main house with his boots barely laced and his shirt hanging open against the October chill. The autumn of 1876 had settled over the Montana territory with a bite that promised an early winter, and Cole's breath came out in white puffs as he sprinted toward the birthing barn where his prize mare had been laboring since sundown. He'd left his foreman watching over her just 2 hours ago, but Sam was nowhere to be seen now, and the mare's cries had taken on a desperate edge that made Cole's stomach clench with worry. The animal had cost him 3 years of careful breeding and more money than he cared to admit. But more than that, she reminded him of the horse his father had ridden before the fever took him 5 years back. Cole threw open the barn door expecting to find chaos, perhaps the mare thrashing in the throes of a difficult birth, maybe even the devastating sight of a stillborn foal. Instead, he found something that stopped him dead in his tracks and made him question whether he'd somehow stumbled into a dream. A woman knelt in the straw beside the mare, her dark hair falling in waves down her back, catching the lamplight like polished mahogany. She wore a simple traveling dress covered in dust and mud, and she was singing. The song was unlike anything Cole had ever heard, not a church hymn or a saloon tune or even one of the old Irish ballads his mother used to hum while kneading bread. The melody wound through the air like honey, sweet and golden, rising and falling with a gentleness that seemed to wrap around every living thing in that barn. The mare had stopped her panicked movements and lay still, her sides heaving but her eyes no longer rolling white with fear. And there, still slick with birth and wobbling on legs that barely held, stood a foal, the most perfect little colt Cole had ever laid eyes on. The woman's voice never wavered as she reached out to steady the foal, her hands sure and gentle as they guided the newborn closer to its mother. Cole watched, transfixed, as the colt began to nurse, its tiny tail flicking with the instinctive pleasure of that first meal. Only then did the woman's song fade into silence, and only then did she seem to notice Cole standing in the doorway like a fool with his mouth hanging open. She looked up at him with eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Her face was striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones and a determined chin, and there was something in her expression that spoke of hard miles traveled and harder decisions made. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, Cole guessed, though there was an old soul quality to her gaze that made her seem both young and ancient at once. "I hope you don't mind," she said finally, her voice carrying the faint lilt of somewhere back east, maybe Boston or Philadelphia. "I heard the mare from the road and I couldn't just pass by. I've always had a way with horses, especially the laboring ones. My father used to say I could sing a horse through anything." Cole found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Who are you? And where the hell did you come from?" She stood slowly, brushing straw from her skirts with hands that trembled just slightly. Now that Cole looked closer, he could see the exhaustion written in every line of her body, the way she swayed just a bit on her feet, the hollow quality to her cheeks that spoke of too many meals missed. "My name is Alina Blackwood. I've been traveling for 3 weeks and my horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back. I was walking toward what I hoped was a town when I heard your mare." "There's no town for another 15 miles, Cole said, his mind still trying to catch up with the situation. "You walked 2 miles in the dark." "Alone?" Something flickered across Alina's face, some emotion too complex to name before she schooled her features back into careful neutrality. "I didn't have much choice in the matter, but your mare and foal are healthy now, so I'll be on my way. If you could point me toward that town, I'd be grateful." "Like hell you will," Cole said, the words coming out before his brain had fully approved them. "It's the middle of the night, you're clearly half-starved, and there are wolves in these hills that would make short work of a woman on foot. You'll stay here tonight at least, and in the morning we'll see about getting you wherever it is you're trying to go." Alina's chin came up, and Cole saw the flash of pride that made her spine straighten despite her obvious fatigue. "I don't take charity, Mr. Hastings. How do you know my name?" "There's a sign on your gate, Hastings Ranch, Basic Deduction." Despite everything, Cole felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Well, Miss Blackwood, this isn't charity. You just helped birth what might be the finest colt in Montana territory, and that's worth a hot meal and a bed for the night at the very least. Besides, I'm guessing you can pay your way if you're so opposed to charity. A ranch this size always has work for willing hands." He watched her consider this, saw the exhaustion warring with that stubborn pride, and finally saw the exhaustion win. Her shoulders sagged just slightly, and she nodded. "One night, and then I'll work for my keep until I've earned enough to move on." "Fair enough," Cole said, though something in his chest was already protesting the idea of her moving on at all, which was ridiculous considering he'd met her all of 5 minutes ago. "Come on up to the house. My housekeeper will have gone to bed by now, but I can manage to rustle up some food and show you to a guest room." Lena followed him out of the barn, but not before she'd given the mare and foal one last long look, her hand gentle on the colt's fuzzy head. "Take care of them," she said softly. "They're both stronger than they look, but the colt will need watching for the first few days." "I will," Cole promised, and found he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. The walk to the main house was short, but it gave Cole time to study his unexpected guest from the corner of his eye. She moved with a grace that spoke of good breeding, the kind of deportment that came from years of finishing school and proper society. Yet here she was, covered in road dust and horse-birth, walking into a stranger's house in the middle of the Montana wilderness without a chaperone or apparent concern for propriety. The contradiction fascinated him. The Hastings Ranch house was a sprawling structure that Cole's father had built over the course of 20 years, adding rooms as the family grew and the ranch prospered. It had started as a simple log cabin and evolved into something that almost resembled the grand houses back east, though it would never shake its frontier roughness. Cole led Alina through the kitchen, noting the way her eyes lingered on the pot of stew still sitting on the stove, and he felt a surge of something protective and fierce rise up in his chest. "Sit," he said, pointing to the kitchen table. "I'll warm this up." Alina sat with the careful precision of someone whose muscles were screaming in protest, and Cole busied himself with stoking the stove and ladling stew into a bowl. He cut thick slices of bread from the loaf his housekeeper had made that morning, and set everything in front of Alina with a glass of milk. She stared at the food for a long moment, and he could have sworn he saw her eyes go bright with unshed tears before she blinked them away and picked up her spoon. She ate with the kind of controlled desperation that broke Cole's heart, each bite carefully measured even though he could tell she wanted to wolf it all down. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, trying not to stare and failing miserably. "You said you've been traveling for 3 weeks," he said finally. "Where from?" Alina swallowed her mouthful of stew and met his eyes. "St. Louis originally, though I've taken a rather circuitous route. Long way from home." "Not home anymore," she said, and there was a finality in her tone that closed that particular door firmly. Cole recognized the sound of someone running from something, because he'd heard it often enough in the years since the war had ended and displaced people had started flooding west looking for new starts. He'd been one of them himself in a way, though his flight had been from memories rather than people. "You're welcome here as long as you need," he said quietly. "No questions asked." Alina set down her spoon and studied him with those remarkable eyes. "Why are you being kind to me?" "You don't know anything about me. I could be a thief or a murderer for all you know." "Could be," Cole agreed. "But you're not. I saw the way you were with that mare and foal. That kind of gentleness doesn't live in someone with murder in their heart." "You're very trusting for a rancher in Montana territory." "Maybe, or maybe I'm just a good judge of character." He paused, then added, and maybe I recognize someone who's had a hard time of things and deserves a break." Something in Aliner's expression softened, and for the first time since he'd found her in the barn, she smiled. It transformed her whole face, lit her up from the inside, and Cole felt his breath catch in his throat. "You're a strange man, Cole Hastings." "So I've been told," he said, smiling back. He showed her to one of the guest rooms on the second floor, a comfortable space with a bed piled high with quilts and a window that looked out over the rolling hills of the ranch. Aliner stood in the doorway looking at that bed like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, and Cole had to clear his throat to get past the lump that had formed there. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said, "and I'll have my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, bring you some clean clothes in the morning. She's about your size." "Mrs. Chen," Aliner repeated, surprise evident in her voice. Her husband was one of the railroad workers who settled in the area after the transcontinental line went through. He died in an accident 4 years back, and she needed work. She's the best housekeeper and cook in 3 counties, and anyone who has a problem with her being Chinese can take their business elsewhere. Aliner's smile returned, warmer this time. "I think I'm going to like it here, Mr. Hastings." "Cole," he corrected. "Just Cole, Aliner," she replied. "Just Aliner." He left her then, though it took more willpower than he cared to admit, and made his way back to his own room. Sleep was a long time coming. He kept seeing Aliner in his mind's eye, kept hearing that haunting melody she'd sung to the mare, kept wondering what circumstances had brought a woman of obvious education and refinement to his barn in the middle of the night, alone and nearly desperate. Morning came too early, announced by the rooster's crow and the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Cole dressed and headed downstairs to find Mrs. Chen already at work in the kitchen, her efficient hands rolling out dough for biscuits. She was a small woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense manner that Cole had always appreciated. "We have a guest," he said without preamble. "A young woman named Aliner. She helped with the mare's foaling last night and she needs a place to stay for a while." Mrs. Chen's hands never stopped their work, but one eyebrow rose slightly. "A young woman traveling alone, seems so, running from something or running to something, couldn't say for certain, maybe both." Mrs. Chen nodded, processing this. "I'll take her some clothes after breakfast." "What are your intentions, Mr. Cole?" The question caught him off guard, though it shouldn't have. Mrs. Chen had known him since he was 22 years old and still raw from the war, and she had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. "I don't have any intentions beyond giving her a place to stay and some honest work if she wants it." Mrs. Chen said, in a tone that suggested she didn't believe him for a second. "The mare and foal, both healthy. Aliner sang to them, and I swear to God I've never seen anything like it. That colt came into the world like he was being welcomed by angels. So she has a gift," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully. "That's valuable on a ranch like this. The horses have been skittish ever since that mountain lion came through last month." Cole hadn't thought of that, but now that Mrs. Chen mentioned it, he realized she was right. Several of the horses were still nervous, shying at shadows and making them difficult to work with. If Aliner really did have a way with animals, she could be invaluable. "I offered her work in exchange for room and board," he said. She seemed inclined to accept. "Good," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "A woman alone needs protection, whether she wants to admit it or not. Better she stays here where we can keep an eye on her than wanders off to town where God knows what might happen." Aliner appeared in the kitchen doorway as if summoned by the conversation, and Cole felt his heart do an odd little skip at the sight of her. She'd cleaned up as best she could with the water in her room, and her hair was braided back from her face, revealing the elegant line of her neck. The traveling dress was still dusty and worn, but she carried herself with such natural dignity that it didn't matter. "Good morning," she said, her voice still carrying that fascinating rasp of exhaustion. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Cole said quickly. "This is Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper. Mrs. Chen, Aliner Blackwood." The two women took each other's measure in the way women do, some form of silent communication passing between them that Cole had never quite understood. Whatever Mrs. Chen saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded and gestured to the table. "Sit. Breakfast will be ready shortly. You look like you could use about a week's worth of proper meals." "I won't argue with that," Alina said with a small smile, settling into a chair. "Thank you for your hospitality." Cole found himself unable to stop watching Alina as she ate the breakfast Mrs. Chen set before her. There was something magnetic about her, some quality that went beyond her physical appearance. She had an awareness to her, a way of taking in everything around her with those sharp green eyes, as if she were constantly cataloging and analyzing her surroundings. It was the behavior of someone who'd learned to be cautious, and it made Cole wonder again what she was running from. His foreman, Sam Wheeler, came in through the back door with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been working the ranch for years. He was a grizzled man in his 50s, tough as old leather and twice as weathered, but he had a good heart and a way with the cowboys that made him invaluable. He stopped short at the sight of Alina, his eyes going wide with surprise. "Sam, this is Alina Blackwood," Cole said. "She helped with the mare's foaling last night. Alina, this is Sam Wheeler, my foreman." Sam recovered quickly and touched the brim of his hat politely. "Ma'am. That was some mighty fine work you did. I've been ranching for 30 years and I've never seen a birth go that smooth after such a rough start. The boss here had been worried sick about that mare." Alina flushed slightly at the praise. "I was glad I could help. How are they doing this morning?" "Colt's already on his feet proper and nursing strong," Sam reported. "Mare's resting easy. I'd say they're both going to be just fine, thanks to you." "I'd like to check on them after breakfast if that's all right," Alina said, looking at Cole. "Of course," he said. "And then maybe we can talk about that work arrangement we discussed last night." The day that followed set the pattern for the ones that came after. Alina proved herself to be everything she'd claimed and more, moving through the ranch with a quiet competence that impressed even the most skeptical of Cole's ranch hands. She had indeed inherited some kind of gift with horses, able to calm even the most fractious animals with her voice and gentle hands. Within a week, every horse on the ranch seemed to perk up when she approached, and the skittish ones that had been nearly impossible to work with after the mountain lion incident became manageable again. But it was the singing that really set Alina apart. She sang while she worked, old songs and new ones, ballads and work songs and melodies that seemed to come from her own imagination. The sound carried across the ranch yard and into the fields, and Cole found himself inventing excuses to work closer to wherever Alina was, just so he could hear that remarkable voice. He wasn't the only one affected. The ranch hands, tough men hardened by years of difficult work, would stop what they were doing just to listen when Alina sang. Even Mrs. Chen, who rarely showed emotion, was caught humming Alina's melodies while she worked in the kitchen. The whole ranch seemed lighter somehow, as if Alina's presence had lifted some weight Cole hadn't even realized they'd been carrying. As the days stretched into weeks, Cole found himself growing more and more attached to his unexpected guest. He looked forward to breakfast just for the chance to see her across the table, to watch the way the morning light caught in her hair and painted her face in shades of gold. He invented reasons to ride out to whichever pasture she was working in, just to exchange a few words or to see her smile. At night, he lay awake thinking about the sound of her laugh, the grace of her hands, the mystery of her past. He was falling in love with her, and the realization hit him one evening as he watched her in the paddock with a yearling that had been giving them trouble. She stood with the young horse, her hand on its neck, singing one of her wordless melodies, and the yearling's ears pricked forward as if listening to the most fascinating story ever told. The setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and rose, and Alina looked like something out of a dream, beautiful and ethereal and absolutely perfect. Cole knew he should be cautious. He knew nothing about her past, nothing about what had driven her to his ranch in the middle of the night. She could be married or promised to someone else. She could have a dozen reasons why she would never look at a rough rancher like him with anything more than friendly gratitude, but his heart didn't care about any of that. His heart only knew that Alina Blackwood had walked into his life and changed everything, and he couldn't imagine letting her walk back out again. The problem was that Alina still maintained a certain distance, a careful wall between herself and everyone on the ranch. She was friendly but never familiar, helpful but never presumptuous. She worked hard and earned her keep, but she never talked about staying permanently, never made any mention of a future beyond the next week or the next month. It was as if she were constantly poised to run, and that scared Cole more than he wanted to admit. The first real crack in Alina's armor came on a cold November morning when a letter arrived from town. The ranch received mail only once a week, brought out by a rider from the general store, and usually it was just business correspondence or newspapers from back east. But this time there was a letter addressed to Alina Blackwood, care of the Hastings Ranch, and Cole's hands had shaken slightly as he'd handed it to her over breakfast. All the color had drained from Alina's face when she saw the envelope. She'd stared at it for a long moment before excusing herself from the table and disappearing upstairs. She didn't come back down, and when Cole went to check on her an hour later, he found her sitting on the edge of her bed, the unopened letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. "Alina," he said softly from the doorway. "What's wrong?" She looked up at him, and the anguish in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "I should have known they'd find me eventually. I just hoped I'd have more time." Cole entered the room without invitation and sat down beside her on the bed, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to offer comfort. "Who found you?" "My brother," Alina said, her voice breaking on the words. "Or rather, the private detective he hired to track me down." "Why are you running from your brother?" Alina was silent for so long that Cole thought she might not answer. But then she took a shaky breath and began to speak, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "His name is Charles Blackwood. After our parents died 2 years ago, I became his ward, even though I was already 21. The courts decided that as an unmarried woman, I needed a male relative to manage my inheritance and oversee my welfare. Charles took his role very seriously, too seriously." She paused, twisting the letter in her hands. "He became obsessed with marrying me off to someone suitable, someone who could further his business interests and social standing. He arranged a marriage to a man named Cornelius Ashford, a business associate who's 43 years old and has already buried 2 wives. I refused, and Charles locked me in my room and told me I'd stay there until I came to my senses." Cole felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice calm. "How did you get away?" "Our maid, Sarah, helped me. She'd been with our family since I was a child, and she couldn't bear to see what Charles was doing. She smuggled me out one night and gave me what money she'd saved. I took the first train west, and I've been moving ever since, always afraid that Charles would find me and drag me back to St. Louis to marry that horrible man." "And now he knows where you are," Cole said quietly. Alina nodded, finally opening the letter with trembling fingers. Cole watched her read it, saw the emotions play across her face: fear, anger, resignation. When she finished, she handed it to him without a word. The letter was from a detective agency confirming Alina's location and informing her that her brother would be arriving to collect her within the month. The tone was coldly professional, but the underlying message was clear. Resistance was futile, and Alina would be returned to her brother's custody whether she liked it or not. "No," Cole said firmly, crumpling the letter in his fist. "That's not going to happen." Alina looked at him with something like hope flickering in her eyes. "You can't stop him, Cole. Charles is a powerful man with powerful friends. He'll have lawyers and law enforcement on his side. I'm an unmarried woman with no legal standing. The courts will force me to return." "Not if you're married," Cole said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. But once they were said, he realized he meant them with every fiber of his being. "Marry me, Aliner. Marry me and your brother will have no legal claim on you." Aliner stared at him in shock. "Cole, you can't be serious. You barely know me. You can't just marry me to save me from my brother." "Why not?" Cole challenged. "People get married for all kinds of reasons out here. Land, money, companionship, protection. This isn't so different." "But you don't love me," Aliner whispered, and there was something in her voice that made Cole's heart ache. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in his own. "Don't I, Aliner? I've been half in love with you since the moment I found you singing to that mare. This past month, watching you work, listening to you sing, getting to know you, has been the happiest I've been in years. Maybe this isn't the most conventional proposal, but my feelings are real. I want you to stay. Not just to protect you from your brother, but because I can't imagine this ranch without you anymore." Aliner's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different somehow, softer. "I care about you too," she admitted. "More than I should, given the circumstances, but Cole, marriage is forever. You deserve better than a wife who comes with as much baggage as I do." "I don't want better," Cole said firmly. "I want you. Baggage and all, stay with me, Aliner, marry me. Let me give you the life you deserve, where you're free to sing and work with the horses and never have to worry about someone locking you away or forcing you into a marriage you don't want." He could see her wavering, see the longing in her eyes warring with her sense of practicality. So he played his final card, the one he'd been holding close to his heart for weeks now. "I love you, Aliner Blackwood. I know it's fast, and I know this isn't how these things are supposed to happen, but I love you. And I think maybe, given time, you could love me too." "I already do," Aliner said softly, and the admission seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted him. "God help me, Cole, I already do. I've tried not to, tried to keep my distance and remember that this is just temporary, but you've been so kind and patient and good, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Cole felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "Then marry me. Say yes, and we'll ride into town today and find a preacher and make it official before your brother can do a damn thing about it." Aliner laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy that Cole wanted to hear every day for the rest of his life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Cole Hastings, though you're absolutely insane for asking." "Probably," Cole agreed, pulling her into his arms and holding her close. "But it's the best kind of insane." They rode into town that very afternoon, accompanied by Mrs. Chen and Sam as witnesses. The town of Silver Creek was small but growing, a collection of buildings clustered around a main street that served the ranches and farms in the surrounding area. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, was an elderly man who'd been ministering to the area for 30 years, and he performed the ceremony in his small church with a smile on his weathered face. Cole had never put much stock in marriage before, had never thought he'd find someone who could make him want to forsake his bachelor ways and build a life together. But standing there in that simple church with Aliner's hand in his, promising to love and honor her for all his days, felt like the most natural thing in the world. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and Cole kissed his new bride for the first time, he felt something slot into place in his chest, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment without even knowing it. The ride back to the ranch was full of laughter and teasing from Mrs. Chen and Sam, both of whom seemed delighted by the turn of events. Aliner rode beside Cole with her hand occasionally reaching out to touch his arm, as if to reassure herself that this was real, that she was truly married and safe from her brother's schemes. That night, after a celebratory dinner prepared by Mrs. Chen and toasted by every ranch hand on the property, Cole led Aliner up to what was now their shared bedroom. He'd had his things moved into the master suite that afternoon, the room that had once belonged to his parents, and it felt right to start their married life there. They stood awkwardly for a moment, both suddenly aware of the enormity of what they'd done. They'd married in haste, driven by necessity and burgeoning feelings, but they were still virtual strangers in many ways. Cole cleared his throat, searching for the right words. Alina, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you tonight or any night until you're ready. This marriage may have started as a way to protect you, but I want it to be real. I want us to build something genuine together, at whatever pace feels right to you. Alina looked at him with such warmth in her eyes that Cole felt his breath catch. You're a good man, Cole Hastings. I think I might be the luckiest woman in Montana territory. I'm the lucky one, Cole said softly. You're the one who walked into my life and made me realize what I'd been missing. She crossed the room to where he stood and reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. I'm ready, she said quietly. I want this to be real too. I want to be your wife in every way. Cole pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks, and Alina melted against him with a soft sigh that sent heat rushing through his veins. They came together with a mixture of tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, finding a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. And afterward, lying tangled together in the big bed with the moonlight streaming through the window, Cole thought he might actually understand what people meant when they talked about heaven on earth. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Cole's life. He and Alina settled into married life with surprising ease, finding joy in the small domestic moments as well as the grand gestures. They worked side by side during the day, Alina continuing to use her gift with the horses while Cole managed the broader operations of the ranch. In the evenings, they'd sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams. Alina bloomed under the attention and security, losing the hunted look that had haunted her eyes when she first arrived. She laughed more, sang more, let herself truly relax into her new life. She became friends with Mrs. Chen, learning to cook and keep house in between her work with the animals. The ranch hands adored her, responding to her natural kindness and the genuine interest she showed in their lives. Cole fell more in love with her every day. He loved the way she hummed while she worked, the way she scrunched up her nose when she was thinking hard about something, the way she fit perfectly against his side when they stood watching the horses in the pasture. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her fierce independence and the way she leaned on him when she needed to. She was everything he hadn't known he was looking for, and he thanked God every day that she'd wandered into his barn that fateful night. But their bubble of happiness couldn't last forever, and it burst exactly 4 weeks after their wedding when a fancy carriage rolled up the ranch drive, announcing the arrival of Charles Blackwood. Cole had been in the north pasture checking fence lines when Sam came galloping up with the news. He'd ridden back to the main house at a speed that probably wasn't safe, his heart pounding with protective fury. He found Alina standing on the porch facing a man who could only be her brother, and the resemblance between them was striking. Charles Blackwood had the same dark hair and sharp features as Alina, but where her face was open and warm, his was cold and calculating. "There you are," Charles said as Cole dismounted and strode to Alina's side. "I assume you're the ranch hand who's been harboring my sister." "I'm Cole Hastings," Cole said evenly, wrapping an arm around Alina's waist. "And I'm not a ranch hand. This is my ranch, and Alina isn't your sister anymore. She's my wife." The look of shock and fury that crossed Charles Blackwood's face would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "You're what, my wife?" Cole repeated, holding up Alina's left hand to display the simple gold band he'd placed there 4 weeks ago. "We were married legally and properly, with witnesses and a preacher. Alina is no longer under your authority and she's not going anywhere with you." Charles turned his cold gaze on Alina. "You foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've thrown away your entire future, your place in society, your inheritance for what? To play house with some frontier cowboy?" "I've claimed my future," Alina said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor Cole could feel running through her body. "The future you wanted for me was a cage, Charles. Cole has given me freedom and respect and love. I'm not leaving." "You think you have a choice?" Charles sneered. I've already spoken with the territorial judge. This marriage is a sham, a transparent attempt to avoid your legal obligations. It can be annulled and you will be returned to my custody where you belong. The hell she will, Cole said, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. I don't care what judge you think you've bought off. Eleanor is my wife and she's staying here. If you try to take her, you'll have to go through me and every man on this ranch. As if summoned by his words, Sam and the other ranch hands appeared from various parts of the property, forming a loose semicircle behind Cole and Eleanor. They were all armed, all capable, and all loyal to their boss and his new bride. The message was clear. Charles Blackwood was outnumbered and outgunned. Charles looked around at the assembled men and his expression hardened. This isn't over, he said coldly. I'll be back with the law and then we'll see how tough you frontier types really are. You do that, Cole said. But I'll tell you right now, there's no law in Montana territory that says a married woman has to leave her husband to go back to a brother who wants to force her into an unwanted marriage. You've got no legal standing here, Blackwood, and any judge who isn't corrupt will tell you the same. Charles Blackwood climbed back into his carriage without another word, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. As the carriage rolled back down the drive, Eleanor sagged against Cole, all the strength seeming to drain out of her at once. It's all right, Cole murmured, holding her close. I've got you, he can't hurt you anymore. But Eleanor shook her head. You don't know Charles like I do, he doesn't give up ever. He'll find a way to make trouble for us, I know he will. She was right to be worried. Over the next few weeks, Charles Blackwood proved to be a persistent and resourceful enemy. He filed legal challenges to the marriage, claiming Eleanor had been coerced or wasn't of sound mind. He spread rumors in town about Cole's character and Eleanor's virtue. He even hired men to watch the ranch, trying to gather evidence of wrongdoing that he could use against them. But Charles had underestimated the bonds of community in Silver Creek. The people who knew Cole respected him, and those who'd gotten to know Eleanor liked her. The territorial judge, a fair man named Clements, reviewed the marriage certificate and the testimony of witnesses and declared it completely legal and binding. The sheriff, a tough old bird named Jackson, ran off Charles's hired spies with a warning not to come back. And the townspeople, from the general store owner to the saloon keeper, made it clear that Charles Blackwood and his Eastern money weren't welcome in Silver Creek. Finally, after 6 weeks of futile efforts, Charles gave up. He left Montana territory in a fury, but not before sending one final letter to Eleanor. Cole had been there when she opened it, ready to offer comfort if the contents were hurtful. Instead, Eleanor had read the short message and then laughed, a sound of pure relief and triumph. He's disowning me, she said, showing Cole the letter. He says I'm no longer a Blackwood, that I've forfeited my inheritance and my place in the family. He never wants to hear from me again. How do you feel about that? Cole asked carefully. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Free, she said finally. For the first time in 2 years, I feel completely free. Charles was the last chain tying me to a life I never wanted. Now that's gone, and I can just be Eleanor Hastings, wife of a Montana rancher, and that's all I want to be. Cole pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. Eleanor Hastings suits you, he said. Though I do miss hearing you sing, you've been so stressed these past weeks that I feel like we've barely heard your voice. Eleanor's expression softened. I've missed it too, she admitted. The singing, I mean. It's always been how I process my emotions, how I make sense of the world, but I've been too wound up to let the music come. Then sing now, Cole urged. Sing for me, for the ranch, for yourself. Remind us all why we fell in love with you in the first place. So Eleanor had sung, right there in the kitchen with Cole as her only audience, and the sound had been glorious. She sang of freedom and love, of new beginnings and second chances, and Cole had felt tears prick his eyes at the beauty of it. When she finished, he'd applauded enthusiastically, and she'd laughed and curtsied like she was performing in some grand concert hall instead of a frontier kitchen. That evening at dinner, with all the ranch hands assembled and Mrs. Chen serving her famous roast beef, Cole had stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he'd said, "to my wife, Eleanor, who walked into our lives and made everything better, and I have a request to make of her if she's willing." Eleanor had looked at him with curiosity and affection. "What kind of request?" "I'd like you to sing for the whole ranch," Cole had said. "Not just when you're working with the horses, but really sing. Let everyone hear that beautiful voice of yours, because the thing you said to me that first night has stayed with me. Your father said you could sing a horse through anything. Well, I think you can sing people through things too, and I think everyone here could benefit from your gift." Eleanor had looked around the table at all the expectant faces, and Cole had seen the moment she'd decided to trust them, to open herself up and share this precious part of herself. "All right," she'd said, "I'll sing." And so had begun a new tradition at the Hastings Ranch. Every evening after dinner, Eleanor would sing. Sometimes it was old songs that everyone knew, and the ranch hands would join in, their rough voices blending with her clear soprano. Sometimes it was new songs she'd written herself, stories set to music that spoke of life on the frontier and the beauty of the Montana landscape. And sometimes it was those wordless melodies that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the ordinary world, haunting and beautiful and transformative. The singing became famous throughout the territory. People would ride out from town just to hear Eleanor perform, and the Hastings Ranch became known as much for its music as for its horses. Traveling musicians would stop by hoping to learn Eleanor's songs, and more than one had left with tears in their eyes, moved beyond words by what they'd heard. But the singing did more than just entertain. It healed something in all of them, soothed rough edges and eased old pains. The ranch hands who'd fought in the war and carried scars both visible and invisible found peace in Eleanor's melodies. Mrs. Chen, who rarely spoke of the husband she'd lost, began to smile more often. Even the horses seemed happier, as if Eleanor's music had seeped into the very bones of the ranch and made it a better place. For Cole, the singing was a nightly reminder of how lucky he was. He would sit and watch his wife make magic with her voice, and he would think about that night months ago when he'd burst into the barn expecting disaster and found Eleanor instead. It felt like fate, like some benevolent force had guided her to his ranch at exactly the right moment, bringing them together in a way that benefited them both. As autumn gave way to winter, and the Montana landscape transformed under a blanket of snow, Cole and Eleanor's relationship deepened. They learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's goals. Eleanor took on more responsibility for the horse breeding program, her gift allowing her to match mares and stallions in ways that produced exceptional foals. Cole expanded the ranch's operations, buying adjacent land and increasing their herds, secure in the knowledge that he had a true partner by his side. They weathered their first Montana winter together, huddled close on the coldest nights, telling stories and making plans for the future. They celebrated Christmas with the whole ranch family, and Eleanor sang carols that made even the most hardened cowboys wipe away tears. They welcomed the new year of 1877 with hope and excitement, looking forward to all the possibilities that lay ahead. In February, Eleanor began to feel unwell in the mornings, and Mrs. Chen had taken one look at her and pronounced with absolute certainty that she was expecting a child. Cole had been overjoyed, picking Eleanor up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. A baby, a child born of their love, seemed like the perfect capstone to their whirlwind romance and hasty marriage. Eleanor bloomed with pregnancy, her already beautiful face taking on an ethereal glow that made Cole's breath catch every time he looked at her. She continued to work with the horses through her first trimester, though Cole and Mrs. Chen both watched her like hawks to make sure she didn't overexert herself. She sang to the baby, her hands resting on her growing belly, and Cole would sometimes put his ear against her stomach, and swear he could hear their child responding to its mother's voice. The pregnancy wasn't always easy. Elinor suffered from severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and there were days when she could barely keep anything down. Cole hated seeing her suffer, felt helpless in the face of her discomfort, but Elinor bore it all with remarkable grace and even managed to joke about it. "Our child is already as stubborn as its father," she'd say with a weak smile after a particularly bad bout of nausea. "Refusing to let me have an easy time of it. Takes after its mother too," Cole would reply, bringing her crackers and weak tea. "Brave and beautiful and stronger than anyone gives it credit for." As spring arrived and Elinor entered her third trimester, the whole ranch prepared for the coming addition. Mrs. Chen assembled a layette of tiny clothes and blankets, her efficient hands creating garments of surprising delicacy. The ranch hands, most of whom had never been around babies, suddenly became experts in child rearing, offering advice they'd gleaned from sisters and wives and mothers back home. Sam built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving horses into the headboard with surprising artistry. Cole found himself gripped by a strange combination of excitement and terror. He was going to be a father, responsible for a tiny human life, and the weight of that responsibility sometimes felt crushing. What if he failed? What if he couldn't provide for his family? What if something went wrong during the birth, and he lost Elinor or the baby or both? Elinor sensed his fears and addressed them one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she said, taking his hand. "I see how you are with the animals, with the ranch hands with me. You're patient and kind and strong. Those are exactly the qualities a child needs." "But what if I'm not enough?" Cole asked, voicing the fear that kept him awake at night. "What if something happens to you?" "Elinor, I can't lose you. I only just found you." "You're not going to lose me," Elinor said firmly. "I'm strong, the baby's strong, and we have Mrs. Chen who's helped deliver half the babies in this territory. Everything is going to be fine, Cole. You have to trust in that." Cole wanted to believe her, wanted to share her confidence, but the memory of his own mother's difficult births and eventual death from childbed fever haunted him. He'd been only 15 when she died giving birth to a stillborn sister, and he'd watched his father's heart break in ways that never fully healed. He couldn't bear the thought of history repeating itself, but Elinor was right to be confident. When her labor began on a warm May morning, everything proceeded smoothly. Mrs. Chen took charge with calm efficiency, banishing Cole from the bedroom but allowing him to pace in the hallway outside. The labor lasted 8 hours, and Cole aged about 10 years during that time, jumping at every sound and driving Sam crazy with his agitation. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Cole heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's first cry, strong and lusty and absolutely perfect. Mrs. Chen emerged from the bedroom with a smile on her face and beckoned him inside. Elinor lay in the bed looking exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her face flushed. And in her arms, wrapped in one of Mrs. Chen's carefully crafted blankets, was their son. Cole approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his firstborn child. "He's perfect," Cole whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Elinor, he's absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Elinor asked, and carefully transferred the baby into Cole's arms. Cole had handled countless foals and calves, had held fragile newborn creatures and nursed them to health, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming surge of love and protectiveness he felt holding his son. The baby was so small, so vulnerable, and yet so utterly perfect in every detail. Tiny fingers curled into fists, a button nose, eyes that would eventually open and see the world. This was his child, his and Elinor's, a living testament to their love. What should we name him? Cole asked, unable to look away from his son's face. "I was thinking about your father," Elinor said softly. "What was his name?" "William," Cole said. "William James Hastings." Then let's call him William, Eleanor suggested. Will for short. Does that sound right to you? Cole tested the name, found it fit perfectly. Will Hastings. Yes, that's exactly right. They spent that first night as a family of 3 in a state of wonder, taking turns holding Will and marveling at every little movement and sound. The baby was healthy and strong, nursing well and already showing signs of his father's stubbornness and his mother's determination. When Eleanor sang to him for the first time, his eyes opened briefly, already responding to the sound of his mother's voice, and Cole felt tears slip down his cheeks at the beauty of the moment. The ranch celebrated Will's arrival with the enthusiasm of an extended family welcoming a new member. Every ranch hand stopped by to offer congratulations and gifts, practical things like hand-carved toys and promises to teach the boy to ride when he was old enough. Mrs. Chen doted on Will with the affection of a grandmother, taking over much of Eleanor's household duties so she could focus on recovering from the birth and bonding with her baby. Cole threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Will when the baby was fussy. He sang lullabies in his rough voice when Eleanor was too tired, though he freely admitted his singing couldn't hold a candle to hers. He built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding a proper nursery and extra bedrooms for the children he hoped they'd have in the future. Watching Eleanor with their son filled Cole with a contentment he'd never known existed. She was a natural mother, patient and nurturing, singing to Will constantly and filling his early days with music and love. The baby thrived under her care, growing strong and healthy, reaching his milestones right on schedule. As Will grew from infant to toddler, he displayed characteristics from both his parents. He had Eleanor's green eyes and musical ear, often humming along to his mother's songs before he could even speak clearly. But he had Cole's stubborn determination and love of horses, toddling out to the paddocks as soon as he could walk and demanding to be lifted up to see the animals. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Cole and Eleanor ran the operation together, making decisions jointly and playing to each other's strengths. The ranch prospered under their combined management, becoming known throughout Montana Territory for its exceptional horses and warm hospitality. People spoke of the Hastings Ranch as a special place, somewhere that music and hard work combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Eleanor never stopped singing, though her repertoire expanded to include lullabies and nursery rhymes for Will's benefit. The evening concerts continued, and now they often featured a toddler dancing to his mother's music, his uncoordinated movements bringing smiles to every face in the room. Cole would watch his wife and son together and think that he must be the luckiest man alive. When Will was 2 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again, and this time she sailed through the pregnancy with minimal discomfort. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Chen barely had time to prepare. Cole was actually present for the birth this time, holding Eleanor's hand and offering encouragement. And when their daughter emerged with a lusty cry, he fell in love all over again. They named her Rose after the wild roses that grew in profusion around the ranch every summer. She had Cole's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and from the very beginning, she displayed a sweetness of temperament that complemented Will's more boisterous nature. Where Will was all energy and enthusiasm, Rose was contemplative and gentle. But both children inherited their mother's musical gift and their father's love of the land. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Will and Rose grew up running wild across the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk properly, helping with age-appropriate chores and absorbing their parents' values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. Eleanor taught them music, and both children had beautiful voices that they used in the evening concerts. Cole taught them ranching, passing on the skills and knowledge his father had given him. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Cole acquired more land, expanded their operations, and invested in improvements that made life easier for everyone who lived and worked there. But he never forgot the importance of community and family. Never let the business side of things overshadow the relationships that made the ranch special. Eleanor became a respected figure in Silver Creek and the surrounding territory. Her musical gifts were celebrated, and she was often asked to perform at town events and celebrations. But she never let fame change her, remaining the same warm, genuine person who'd wandered into Cole's barn all those years ago. She used her platform to advocate for causes she believed in, speaking out about women's education and the rights of workers, becoming a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. When Will was 10 and Rose was 8, Eleanor gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Jack and Daniel. The twins were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament, one outgoing and mischievous, the other quiet and thoughtful. Their arrival threw the household into cheerful chaos, and Cole often joked that he was outnumbered by children and horses in roughly equal measure. But he wouldn't have changed a thing. Every day brought new challenges and new joys, from teaching the older children advanced riding techniques to walking the floor with teething twins. Eleanor managed it all with remarkable grace, somehow balancing motherhood, her work with the horses, and her music without ever seeming overwhelmed. On quiet nights, after the children were in bed and the ranch was settling down for sleep, Cole and Eleanor would sit together on the porch as they had in those early days of their marriage. They'd talk about the day's events, make plans for the future, or simply sit in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked one evening, the question emerging unexpectedly. "Running away from St. Louis, ending up here marrying me. You could have had such a different life." Eleanor looked at him with such love and certainty that his doubts evaporated before they could fully form. "I've never regretted a single moment," she said firmly. "That life in St. Louis wasn't living, Cole. It was existing in a cage made of expectations and social obligations. Here I'm free. I have you, I have our children, I have this beautiful place and work I love and music whenever I want it. This is the life I was meant to have. I just had to be brave enough to claim it." "I'm glad you were brave," Cole said, pulling her close. "I'm glad that mare went into labor when she did, and I'm glad you heard her cries from the road. I'm glad for every circumstance that brought you to me, because my life didn't really start until you walked into that barn." "Our life," Eleanor corrected gently. "It's our life, Cole. Everything we've built together, and I wouldn't want it any other way." They sat there in the gathering darkness, watching the stars come out over the Montana landscape, and Cole thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. He'd been a lonely rancher, successful but empty, going through the motions of life without really living it. Eleanor had been a frightened young woman running from a future she didn't want, desperate for freedom and a chance to define herself on her own terms. Together, they'd created something beautiful. A home filled with love and laughter and music. A ranch that was more than just a business, but a community where everyone was valued and respected. A family that would carry on their legacy long after they were gone. As the years continued to pass, Cole and Eleanor watched their children grow into remarkable young adults. Will developed into a skilled horseman and natural leader, taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations as he matured. At 18, he was already being courted by neighboring ranchers who saw his potential and wanted to form alliances through marriage. But Will wasn't interested in any of the eligible young ladies. He was waiting, he said, for someone who made him feel the way his father clearly felt about his mother. Rose, at 16, had inherited her mother's musical gifts in full measure. Her voice was even more beautiful than Eleanor's, something that filled Eleanor with pride rather than jealousy. Rose gave concerts that drew people from hundreds of miles away, and there was talk of her going east to study music formally. Cole wasn't sure how he felt about that, torn between wanting Rose to have every opportunity and dreading the thought of his daughter so far away. The twins, now 8 years old, were still young enough to be more interested in causing mischief than thinking about their futures. But even they showed signs of the strengths they'd inherited from their parents. Jack's way with animals and Daniel's beautiful singing voice. The ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Montana territory, though Cole and Alina never let success change their core values. They paid their workers fairly, treated everyone with respect, and maintained the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had characterized the place from the beginning. The evening concerts continued, now featuring 3 generations of performers as Mrs. Chen's grandchildren had come to live and work on the ranch after she'd finally retired from housekeeping duties. On a warm summer evening in 1891, 15 years after that fateful night when Alina had wandered into Cole's barn, the ranch threw a celebration to mark the anniversary. The whole territory seemed to turn out, filling the ranch yard with wagons and horses and people dressed in their finest. Long tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by dozens of hands, and a platform had been erected for Alina and the children to perform. Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his wife prepare to sing, and marveled at how she could still take his breath away. She was 40 years old now, and the years had only made her more beautiful in his eyes. There was silver threading through her dark hair, and lines at the corners of her eyes from years of smiling. But she carried herself with the same grace and dignity that had first caught his attention all those years ago. Alina caught his eye and smiled, that special smile she reserved just for him, and Cole felt his heart skip a beat just like it had that first night. Then she opened her mouth and began to sing, and the assembled crowd fell silent, captivated by the beauty of her voice. She sang the story of their life together, a song she'd written specially for this occasion. She sang of a desperate woman and a lonely man, of a restless foal and a fateful meeting, of love found in unexpected places, and a life built through hard work and dedication. She sang of children and growth, of challenges overcome and dreams realized. And through it all, her voice carried such emotion, such pure joy and gratitude that there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But Alina wasn't done. She gestured for their children to join her on the platform, and together the family sang a rousing frontier ballad that had everyone clapping and singing along. Then Rose stepped forward for a solo that showcased her remarkable voice, followed by Will playing a fiddle he'd been secretly learning. Even the twins contributed, singing a silly song that had everyone laughing. Finally, Alina called Cole up to the platform. He went reluctantly, never comfortable being the center of attention, but Alina took his hand and pulled him close. "I want everyone here to know," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, "that this man saved my life. Not just by giving me shelter and safety, but by giving me love and respect and a partnership that has enriched every day of the past 15 years. Cole Hastings is the best man I've ever known, and I'm honored to be his wife." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Cole felt his face flush with embarrassment and pleasure. He pulled Alina into his arms and kissed her soundly, not caring who was watching, and the cheers grew louder. As the celebration continued into the night, with dancing and music and laughter filling the air, Cole found a quiet moment to step away and look out over his land. The ranch stretched out before him in all directions, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. But more than that, it was filled with life and love, with the people who'd become his extended family and the children who were his legacy. He felt Alina come up beside him, slipping her hand into his, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Cole said finally. "For what?" Alina asked, though she was smiling like she knew exactly what he meant. "For saying yes that day when I asked you to marry me, for taking a chance on a rough rancher who had no business asking a woman like you to stay, for building this life with me, for everything." Alina squeezed his hand. "You know what I remember most about that night, When you found me in the barn." "What?" The look on your face when you walked through that door, you looked like you'd seen a miracle. And I remember thinking that if someone could look at me like that, like I was something precious and wonderful, then maybe everything would be all right. And I was right. Everything has been more than all right, it's been perfect. "Not perfect," Cole corrected gently. "We've had our struggles, our hard times, but we've faced them together, and that's made all the difference." "Together," Alina agreed, "always together." They stood there as the party continued behind them, as their children laughed and played with friends, as the ranch they'd built together hummed with life and energy. And Cole thought about that night 15 years ago, about the panicked mare and the miraculous foal and the mysterious woman who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known to say. He'd asked her to stay and sing to the whole ranch, and she had. But she'd given him so much more than music. She'd given him love, partnership, family, purpose. She'd taken a lonely house and turned it into a home. She'd taken a successful but soulless business and infused it with warmth and humanity. She'd taken a man who was merely existing and taught him how to truly live. "I love you," Cole said, the words feeling inadequate to express the depth of his feelings but needing to be said anyway. "I love you too," Alina replied. "From that first night until my last breath, I will always love you." They returned to the party hand in hand, ready to dance and celebrate and bask in the warmth of community and family. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promises, and they would face it together just as they had faced everything else. 20 years later, on a cool autumn evening in 1911, Cole Hastings sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set over the Montana landscape he'd called home for most of his life. He was 63 years old now, his hair mostly gray and his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but he counted himself a wealthy man in all the ways that mattered. Alina sat beside him, her own hair silver-white now but her green eyes as bright and sharp as ever. Age had slowed her some, forced her to give up the more physically demanding aspects of ranch work. But she still sang every day, her voice perhaps not as powerful as it once was, but no less beautiful. She'd become something of a legend in Montana, known throughout the state as a gifted performer and compassionate soul. The ranch was in good hands now, run primarily by Will and his wife Margaret, a capable woman from a neighboring ranch who'd won Will's heart 5 years ago. They had 3 children of their own, ensuring the continuation of the Hastings legacy. Rose had gone east to study music but had returned 2 years ago, unable to stay away from the place she loved. She now taught music in Silver Creek and performed regularly throughout the region. The twins, now 28, had taken different paths. Jack had become a veterinarian, combining his love of animals with formal education, while Daniel had opened a general store in town, using his natural charm and business sense to build a thriving enterprise. The house was full of grandchildren now, 7 in total ranging in age from infant to 10 years old, and their energy and laughter kept Cole and Alina young at heart. The evening concerts had evolved to feature 3 generations of performers, with even the youngest grandchildren eagerly joining in with their piping voices. Cole reached over and took Alina's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing a question he'd asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Alina replied, smiling. "Though I do sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I'd never left St. Louis, never found your ranch that night." "Miserable, probably," Cole said. "Married to that awful Cornelius Ashford, trapped in a life you hated." "I prefer not to think about that," Alina said with a mock shudder. "I'd rather think about all the wonderful things that have happened because I was brave enough to run away. Our children, our grandchildren, this beautiful life we've built. It's been everything I never knew I wanted." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. From inside the house came the sound of children laughing and adults calling them to dinner, the normal chaos of family life that Cole had come to cherish. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Eleanor asked suddenly, after I'd helped with the foal. Cole thought back, trying to recall the exact words. "I said a lot of things that night. Which part?" "You said stay and sing to this whole ranch. Do you remember that?" Cole did remember now that she mentioned it. It had been later, after they'd eaten and he'd shown her to the guest room. He'd been standing in the hallway, reluctant to leave her, and the words had just come out. "I remember, you looked at me like I was crazy." "I thought you might be," Eleanor admitted with a laugh, "but I'm so glad you asked. I'm so glad I stayed. Because this ranch, this family, this life with you has been the greatest gift I could ever have received." "The gift was all mine," Cole said softly. "You're the one who walked into my life and changed everything. You're the one who brought music and light and love to a place that was just existing. You're the one who made a house into a home." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat that way as darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, and children's voices rose in song, carrying on the tradition Eleanor had started so many years ago. Cole closed his eyes and listened to the music, to the sounds of his family and the life they'd created, and felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He'd been blessed beyond measure, given more than he'd ever dreamed possible, all because a desperate woman had heard a mare in distress and stopped to help. All because he'd asked her to stay and sing, and she'd been brave enough to say yes. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to Eleanor or to God or to fate itself. "Thank you for this life, for this love, for everything." Eleanor squeezed his hand, understanding without words what he meant, and together they sat on the porch of their ranch house, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured, ready to face whatever years remained to them with the same partnership and devotion that had carried them through the past 35 years. The music from inside the house swelled and grew, voices blending in harmony, generations united in song, and Cole smiled. This was his legacy, not just the land and the horses and the successful business, but this: family, love, music, joy. This was what mattered, what would endure long after he was gone, and it had all started with a restless foal and a woman who could sing miracles into being. Cole Hastings had asked Eleanor Blackwood to stay and sing to his whole ranch, and she had done exactly that, filling their lives with music and love for more than 3 decades. It was, he thought, the best decision he'd ever made, the luckiest moment of a life filled with blessings. As the last of the daylight faded and the evening stars blazed overhead, Cole and Eleanor rose from their chairs and walked back into the house, into the warmth and light and laughter of their family. The music welcomed them home, as it always had, as it always would, a testament to the enduring power of love and the simple magic of a woman who'd stayed and sung to a whole ranch, and in doing so had created a legacy that would echo through generations. Their story, which had begun with a chance encounter on a desperate night, had become something larger than either of them could have imagined. A testament to courage, love, and the transformative power of taking a chance on the unexpected. It was a story that would be told and retold in the years to come, inspiring others to be brave, to follow their hearts, to believe in the possibility of finding love in the most unlikely places. And though neither Cole nor Eleanor could have known it that first night when he'd found her singing softly to a restless foal, their love story would become part of the mythology of Montana itself, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness and a willingness to say yes to the unknown. They had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations, all because a cowboy had the wisdom to ask a singing stranger to stay, and she had the courage to make that ranch and that cowboy her home forever.